Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Terre, Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams, but we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
Fourth principle, which is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. This privilege calls us not to be isolated and self-centered, believing that our single perspective trumps all others, but rather to be humble, to be open to the great mysteries of truth and meaning that life offers. And those mysteries may speak to us through our own intuition and experience, but also through tradition, community, conflict, nature, and relationships. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalists make sacred the right and responsibility to engage in this free and responsible quest as an act of religious devotion. Institutionally, we have left open the questions of what truth and meaning are, acknowledging that mindful people will, in every age, discover new insights. Reverend Paige Getty, the UU Congregation of Columbia. Our opening words from Kurt Vonnegut. Hello, babies. Welcome to Earth. It's hot in the summer and cold in the winter. It's round and wet and crowded. On the outside, babies, you've got 100 years here. There's only one rule that I know of, babies. God damn it, you've got to be kind. And our hymn number 83.
Storm clouds pass and silence come. Peace Fly high and far and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shining, illuminate our inward view. Help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphony.
Our transitional words from Ralph Waldo Emerson. You cannot do kindness too soon, for you never know how soon it will be too late. And now I would like to invite Bill Breeden to join us. And Reverend Breeden is a retired minister from the Bloomington UU congregation, as many of you know. But he has been part of this congregation for many, many, many years, and we're always delighted and thrilled to have him share with us his wisdom.
It's good to be here. Glenda sends her regards. She was come with me today, but I'm going over to Death Row after this for about 3 hours, and it's a little too cool to be sitting along the riverbank as she did last month for 3 hours. So she decided to stay home. At least it was too cool this morning. It's actually kind of warming up out there now. But she just sent a note to say she wished she was here. You won't be able to introduce me as retired anymore because I've been called back into service. I'm actually full-time this month at the Bloomington UU Church again. Reverend Macklin asked me to come back and join her. And I'll be on staff with her through June of next year, full-time a couple of months and half-time the rest of the time, to give her a chance to take her vacations, which she hasn't had the chance to do for a while because of some difficulty with ministry over there. Hopefully most of that's behind them, and as I always do, the congregation, the community survives and goes on. It should always be noted, especially in churches that have called ministers, settled ministers, that the community, the church is the community, it's not the ministers. Ministers come and go in all sorts of fashion, and church goes on. Let's see. I'm watching that All Along the Watchtower was a great opening prelude. I loved it. It's one of my favorite songs. And the guy on the timpani drums with a little straw hat, it looked like a younger John over there. I'm not sure, when did you make that? It reminded me an awful lot of John Lunsford there. Well, let's see. It's interesting that someone has been taking a course in Kierkegaard and others. Kierkegaard's one of my favorite philosophers. I've studied him deeply. He's probably got the greatest definition of faith I have ever heard. And when he said that faith is being suspended over 70,000 fathoms of water and not knowing how to swim. And that actually in my memoirs, a book I've been working on for many years, I play a mythical game of golf. And on one of the holes, it's a par 3 where I have to hit across the big water to the green and walk across the bridge, and suspended from the bridge is Kierkegaard on a rope. And a sign there says, "Don't bother fishing for balls that's 70,000 fathoms deep." And then he asked me his great either-or question. So I hope you enjoy Kierkegaard. He's one of my favorites. S.K. Well, let's see where I am. John, give me that first picture of Corey, will you? On Friday, on Facebook, I got up Friday morning, and this picture appeared on my Facebook homepage. It's a picture of Corey Johnson, who, if you remember, was a man that I attended, was a minister for when he was executed in January of last year. And Friday was his birthday. He was executed within a few days of his birthday last year. And they had a memorial service for him in the Bronx, New York on Friday. I wish I could have been there. But a man named John Sakars painted this portrait of Corey. And so I want to remind people of Corey every once in a while. When that showed up on my screen, it was like a slap in the face, to be honest with you. I thought I'd put that behind me, and it took most of the morning for me to deal with my feelings about that. Sort of like a PTSD event. But Corey was an amazing human being. Survived 29 years in solitary confinement without a visitor until I came into his life just 2 weeks before he was executed. And I carry him in my heart always. He was a phenomenal, phenomenal human being. Thanks, John. You can take that down. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about survival in an apocalypse. Apocalypse, the book, The Apocalypse, in the New Testament's the last part of the New Testament, the Christian canon, probably the most controversial discussed book in the canon of the New Testament. It's the book of Revelation of John. And it's probably the most misunderstood and misused. In fact, I guarantee you on the way home this afternoon, well, I'm not going home first, I'm going to death row, but usually when I leave here to go home, I turn on my radio and I hit scan and I listen for preachers. There's all kinds of preachers on the radio on Sundays. And I mean, 9 times out of 10, you can find at least 2 preachers talking about the book of Revelation. It's just all over the place, trying to scare people into their church or scare people out of hell or whatever, I don't know. But it's pretty bizarre to listen to the interpretations of this book as if the book was a picture of the future when it was really simply a picture of the present for John on the Isle of Patmos. John, if you don't know, was exiled to the Isle of Patmos. Christianity at that time was an illegal religion. It was not uncommon for the emperor of Rome to use Christians as human torches in his parties, outdoor parties, literally. They were crucified upside down, all kinds of things away, drawn and quartered in the Colosseum. They just had all kinds of ingenious, brutal ways to kill Christians. It was an illegal religion. And probably if it was taken seriously in the United States, it would probably be illegal again. But the simple fact is that John was exiled. To explain why John wrote to what he did, one needs to understand that he was writing to Jewish Christians primarily in the Roman Empire. And he had to write it in code, because if he came out and said Nero's a whatever you want to call him, it would just increase the persecution. So he used Roman numerology, the study of numbers, and he used the Old Testament symbolism, particularly in places, to, in code, encourage the Christian resistors to the empire to resist, to continue to resist. And there's just some beautiful passages in the book about those who overcome will be given a white stone with a new name written on it. And the symbol of the white stone in the Roman Empire, a white stone was given to slaves when they were freed, and they carried it with them to prove their freedom, that they had been set free. And so basically John was saying to them, hang on, when you overcome, you get a white stone with a new name on it. But all that is aside, really, the book is has been abused more than any book in the New Testament. And my sense is that we actually are always living in an apocalypse. You know, that's just simply that's what life is about. We're always there. There is a book called The Apocalypse, the book of Revelation by Jacques Ellul. Ellul was a French theologian, philosopher. It is a very dense book. I read it back in seminary in the 1970s. I think the book came out in '77, and I remember reading it at that time. It's probably the best book on the apocalypse that I've ever found. He basically ends up showing that the book of Revelation affirms universalism. If you know anything about the Revelation, you know you have 7 seals, you have 7 angels that come and wreak havoc. And the 7th final angel that comes in for the destruction of Babylon, which Babylon is representative of the evil of the cities of the empire, right before the destruction of Babylon, the 7th angel calls for all the inhabitants of the city to come out of the city and stand at a safe distance. So in other words, everybody is out of the city before the city is destroyed. And the angel comes on the sign of a rainbow. Might have been the first gay pride event, I don't know. But the fact that he came on the angel on the sign of a rainbow, Elul points out, is symbolism for saying, remember Noah, remember on the ark, he's talking, remember, to Jewish Christians who knew their Old Testament and so forth. Remember that the rainbow was a sign that God put up that said he will never destroy humanity again, never. And that angel of destruction comes on that rainbow and then invites all the people out of Babylon before it's destroyed. So it's a great universalist symbol and fits our faith, our universalist faith, quite well. That's all I want to say about Elul. That's E-L-L-E, how do I spell his name? E-L-L-U-L, Jacques Ellul, if you want to look that book up, if you're into some serious digging into the book of Revelation. Now, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You probably know what they are: conquest, famine, war, and death. Point to a time in any history where they were not present. That's why I say we live in apocalypse all the time. Conquest, famine, war, and death. Today, on this planet, amidst all the wealth that we have, there are 25,000 people a day die of hunger-related diseases, 10,000 of which are children. 10,000 children a day die of basically starvation in a world where we are among the richest in the world, when we have more billionaires than it's ever been seen before and making more all the time. 10,000 children dying of hunger. That is an apocalypse. That's apocalyptic number. So it's not something we should, as most preachers do, is use the book of Revelation to talk about what is coming. You should use the book of Revelation about what is. This is where we are. We're living in apocalyptic times, and we always have. I think I pointed out before that the United States, I believe, I didn't check the number again this morning, but my memory recalls that the United States has only had 17 years in its history that we were not at war. 17 years out of how many? Back 1776. 17 years without a war. That's absurd. We are a nation of apocalyptic times and have been continuously. Worldwide, 5 million people die of hunger. 5 million people of hunger-related illnesses. In the COVID situation, COVID deaths, that 5 million were COVID deaths. And COVID deaths in the United States now is over 700,000. So we've got the death, we've got the famine, we've seen war, and we know that most of it has to do with conquest. Conquest either by the billionaires or by military people, empires, and so forth. We're living in the same world that John the Revelator lived in. It's not changed one bit. And when it boils down to it, the only thing that makes a difference, the only thing that really makes a difference in that world is kindness. Kindness. The Dalai Lama says, be kind whenever possible. And then he adds, kindness is always possible. Kindness is always possible. I have said here several times probably that I consider the breath I hold is the most important breath I've ever had, and I have to give it back and so forth, and how I give it back is what matters. I feel the same way about kindness. I want to make sure that I speak my truth with kindness, because it may be the last truth I speak, but it may also be the last truth that the person I'm speaking to hears. It's not only that I might die in the next breath, you might die in the next breath. I remember a few years ago down in Sanford, Indiana, some boys were out in the street on the edge of a little town down there near where I was born, and they were drag racing and raising all kinds of holy hell, and a guy come out of his house and came out there and just screaming, yelling at him, carrying on. They were screaming back at him, and he fell dead of a heart attack. And I thought, how tragic. Not only that his last words were words of anger, their last words were words of anger, and he ends up dead. So I try to encourage people to understand words. You know, there was a saying back in my college days, this play psychology that was going on in those days that said words don't have meaning, people do. Well, words have meaning too. They really do. People have meaning, but so do words. And so in an apocalyptic world, kindness is one of the greatest values that we can share. The greatest, and it is a great action. And it takes faith, it takes courage to be kind. Be kind. A simple strategy for surviving in the apocalypse is being kind. Work at it and remind yourself of it. It's not so much reminding others, that's their problem. It's reminding me that kindness is the only way out of this. Kindness is the only thing that will save us. As Dr. Roux said in Camus' The Plague, he said, people will laugh when I say this, but the only thing that can save us from the plague is human kindness. If you haven't read Camus' The Plague, I highly recommend it, especially in these days of this pandemic. It's a tremendous novel. It basically it mirrors where we are today, and it's a discussion between Dr. Roux and a minister throughout the book. Roux is pretty much an atheist, agnostic, or whatever, and the minister and he have this theological discussion, which is really an expression of Camus' theology and philosophy all the way through the book. I highly recommend it in these days because of the conversation in it. So, be kind is the first recommendation, first suggestion on how to survive an apocalypse. A second one I would give you is find somebody to love. You remember that old song from, was it Jefferson Airplane, I think, and maybe there was another group that sang it originally. Be kind, or find somebody to love. Don't you need somebody to love, the words went. Don't you want somebody to love? We need to do that. We need to find somebody to love. If you find somebody to love, you spend less time hating. You know, you really will. And I'll tell you where you start to find somebody to love. You start by loving yourself. That's where you start. And if you have to, take a few minutes in the mirror in the morning. I mean, you know, you can fix yourself up a little bit so you look a little better. I usually do. Spend a little time before the mirror and come to the point where you can say, I love you. I love you, the person looking back at me. And when you do this, you'll find it easier to love others because you know that you ain't perfect. You know, when I see myself in the long run, I know my flaws. I know them quite well. And Glenda knows them too. You know, she'll point them out occasionally, and we do the same for each other. But the important thing is, in spite of those, I want to be able to say, yeah, I love who I am. And if I don't love who I am, what do I need to do to learn to do so? What do I need to change about me? Find somebody to love. Start with yourself. And you know, whenever you do this, whenever you try this, you're going to find that changing the world out there starts with changing the world in here. It starts with changing me. Give me that other slide, little meme that came up last night, and I decided I was looking for something, and this thing popped up. And I'm glad John can handle the fact that I sent him something at midnight or so. But there it is. It says, today we're giving out samples of self-awareness. And the people are standing, and you can see the aisle is blocked. They're not facing each other anyway. And so they just give them a sip of self-awareness. Whoa, other people exist. Oops, I'm blocking the aisle. I should move my car. How many times do we think as we're going through the shopping centers, how many times do we recognize, whoa, other people do exist? And if you notice, as you go through places like that, there's a lot of people they're not aware of that at all. They're not aware of that at all. Other people exist. And in order to find somebody to love, in order to, the next thing in terms of surviving an apocalypse is not only to find somebody to love, but to be in community. Be in community. We are not going to survive an apocalypse sitting around in our own little rooms looking at our computer screen. It's going to go away. I mean, it's going to come and go, and we're sitting there all by our own self. We have isolated ourselves as a society because of it. And you know, as I've talked to you before, I'm on Facebook. I have 3,000 some odd friends and all kinds of political persuasions, and I catch all kinds of hell and heaven. It's interesting. I try to be kind to all of them, and as long as they don't get too offensive, I'll keep them on. But that is not a community. That is not being in community. Being in community means being with people. And it's difficult these days with this pandemic. I know it is. But there are ways to do it. You can be in community by remembering at least once or twice a week to call someone you care about and who cares about you. To call someone linked to this community and say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Being in community means staying in touch and knowing when you need something, let someone else know, and when they need something, ask and find out and help provide it. Because living in an apocalypse can make you so pissed off that you forget that you're a human being. You know, it gets ridiculous. The Virginia election last year, what were the two main things that swayed, or this last month? This governor's race was settled on Confederate statues and CRT, which is not taught in any grade school or high school in the United States of America. It's a theory. It is actual history. It's a theory about the actual history of our country, but it's not being taught in grade school. And yet those two issues are the only thing mentioned by the guy who is now governor of Virginia. And when you sit back and look at that, it makes you want to go, blow something up. Don't do that. It can make you so angry that you begin those inward feelings of hatred. And to me, that's where apocalypse really begins. Apocalypse in our own hearts. We need to find a way to be in community. And sometimes, this is important, I said change the world, change yourself. To be in community, sometimes we have to change our own behavior. I mean, we can all be asses, really. And we may be right about what we're speaking about. But we need to change our behavior to be in community, to be with others, to allow them to be themselves and me to be myself. I find that I can talk too much, to be honest, I'm an introvert. I'm not very good at small talk. And so sometimes to get out of the small talk, which I don't even really know how to do, I'll go into a story and talk for 3 days, And luckily I live with a woman who will say, tone it down a little bit, give somebody a chance. So I think this is an important concept of surviving an apocalypse, is self-examination in communication, in being with people, in being aware not only that there are other people exist, but being aware of your presence, being aware of it, and honoring the presence of others. Change our behavior. Another simple thing I believe in surviving apocalypse is get in touch with nature. Really, get in touch with nature. I had another picture I was going to show you, but my camera's putting them up in a strange format and it won't open up for our computer. So I have to change that and save it for another day. But I don't know if you woke up about 4 or 5 days ago and went outside and went, wow. I mean, overnight, the trees before the great undressing showed off, you know. And I went down to our lake and took a picture, and it's just the brilliant gold and yellow and red reflecting in the water. It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and I took a picture of it. But get out in nature. Touch the world you live in, not the world on the screen. Breathe the air of the forest, of the river, of the scene of nature, not simply the air of a cave where you look at the screen. I think it's one of the most healing things you can do. Glenda, last month when I was here and I went to Death Row, and she went out on the river park over there, you know, what that park is, I can't remember, but she sat there, communed with a goose that came up and talked to her continually, and she kept thinking it might peck at her, but it didn't. It was just speaking. But she spent the afternoon there for 3 hours while I was at Death Row. And she said, you know, it's just one of the most calming, wonderful days for quite a while. And it inspired her to write. She's in a writing group, and she said it was one of the best writing days she's had because she was breathing. She was living with reality, not false reality. Albert Camus, in that book, The Plague, which I've gone back to several times, he says the evil in the world comes almost always from ignorance, and goodwill can cause as much damage as ill will if it is not enlightened. People are more often good than bad, though in fact that is not the question. They are more or less ignorant, and this is what one calls vice or virtue, the most appalling vice being the ignorance that thinks it knows everything and which consequently authorizes itself to kill. The murderer's soul is blind, and there is no true goodness or fine love without the greatest possible degree of clear-sightedness. Ignorance can be a terminal disease to a society and to an individual. But the beautiful thing about ignorance is it's curable. It can be cured. And we need to cure our own ignorance of the others. We need to cure our own fear of the others by learning to know them. Camus writes, he knew also what the old man was thinking as his tears flowed, and he, Rue, thought it too, that a loveless world is a dead world, and always there comes a time, an hour, when one is weary of prisons, of one's work, and of one's devotion to duty, and all one craves for is a loved face, the warmth and wonder of a loving heart. There's an awful lot of people in our world, in our society today that are weary. They are weary of their jobs. They are weary of boredom. They are weary of staring at the tube all the time, looking for news, looking for wisdom. And all they really need to find, and what they are really craving and are unaware of their craving, is the wonder and warmth of a loving heart. And that, to me, as Olympia Brown said to us years ago, the first ordained woman minister in the United States, and a Universalist, said, go out and preach the truth of Universalism. And for those who might see this and don't know anything about Unitarian Universalism, briefly let me say, both of our roots, Unitarians and Universalists, came from the Christian tradition. And Universalism specifically was as early as the first century of Christianity proclaiming that there is no hell except the one we make our own, of our own. There is no place of eternal damnation. There is no God so absurdly angry and schizophrenic as to create such a place, that all will be reconciled. And you know, it makes a difference if you're a Universalist. It makes a difference from the standpoint of how you treat others, especially if you believe in an afterlife, which I'm not sure about. I don't really care. But if I did, as a Universalist, the person I'm damning to hell ends up in the same heaven I do. I might have to deal with that person again. I might as well get with it right now, you know. I might as well affirm their humanity here, because I'm going to have to deal with it in the next life again. Now, I don't know that that's the case at all. It doesn't really matter to me what happens after you die. It matters a whole lot what happens as you live. And if you are a Universalist, and even as a Unitarian, I think part of our message is the sacredness of life of the other. The life of the other is as sacred as my own. Camus also talks about, in his book, The Plague, it could be said that once the faintest stirring of hope became possible, the dominion of plague was ended. Once the faintest stirring of hope became possible, the dominion of plague was ended. We need to hang on to that hope, and we need to give that hope to others, that this present apocalypse is not, it's not absolutely determined that it's going to be forever. We will come out of this pandemic someday in some shape or form. I hope we don't go back to normal, because normal wasn't very good. I hope we get a new normal. I hope we get a normal where when I meet a person on the street, even a person who may be angry, I am able to affirm their humanity and respond to them in kindness. And I think the more people we get doing this, the more it may become a norm, a new norm. But as long as we're standing across the street screaming at each other, or sitting at home screaming at the television, or the tube, or whatever, or sending out the unbelievable, what do you call it on Facebook, post, as long as you have this tribalism going on, the pandemic is not just the COVID, the pandemic is hatred. The pandemic is tribalism. The pandemic is the certitude of being right to the point, beyond any point of doubt, to the point where we're willing to kill in order to justify. So again, you survive an apocalypse, be kind, find somebody to love, beginning with yourself, be in community, and be willing to change behavior. Your own, because you will not change anyone else's except by example. This whole deal. There's a new school of relationships, marital counseling and relationship counseling that uses the Four Horsemen as a metaphor for the problems. And the first horseman is criticism. If all we do is criticize one another, that's bringing apocalyptic presence. The other horseman is contempt. And contempt for one another is it's almost predetermined that you're not going to be together very long. Contempt. I mean, relationships are built on love, not contempt. The third horse is defensiveness, that whenever there's something pointed out, we automatically say, I didn't do it. It's not me. It's not my problem. Defensiveness. And the third one is stonewalling. It's just turning away and refusing to deal with it, which I have to say, men are better at that than women. We're pretty good at stonewalling. We can turn away and not express what we want to say and just kind of turn away and think that everything will be fine. Those four horsemen will destroy relationships. And I encourage you to kind of think about that if you're in a relationship, that try always to avoid stonewalling, defensiveness, contempt, and criticism. And speak your truth, beginning with kindness. Because if you're in a relationship, you obviously want to be there, or you would have left before this, and you want it to last. Build kindness in as a beginning, so that the four horsemen of destruction do not destroy that relationship. I recommend the Plague, as I have before, and I also recommend Kierkegaard. He's not the most uplifting philosopher you ever find, but there's some in there that's very wonderful. I encourage you to get out in nature, to be in community, to stay in community, and to believe in the possibilities of a future world that is better. For our children, for our grandchildren, it is absolutely necessary that we have hope. And hope can take us through a lot. Blessed be. Let's join in singing our closing hymn, which is number 16, "'Tis a Gift to be Simple."
Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight, where true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed, to turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right.
To bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed. We shan't be ashamed, I'd say, to say I'm sorry. We shan't be ashamed to say I was wrong. We shan't be ashamed to say I love you. The words of Olympia Brown: we can never make the world safe by fighting. Every nation must learn that the people of all nations are children of God and must share the wealth of the world. You may say this is impractical, far away, can never be accomplished, but it is the work that we're appointed to do. Sometime, somehow, somewhere, we must ever teach this great lesson. There is no vaccine for greed. I can't find it. Nobody has a vaccine for that. And the only way, except maybe love is the vaccine. What the lesson was, we are all children of God or children of life, however you feel. And we must share the wealth of the world. Blessed be.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace. Know that you're loved and your life is sacred.